Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
COPA 71 is a fascinating film. It really is. What attracted you to this story? What made you want to tell it so passionately?
Um, I think the fact that this story is so clearly not about football,
Mm,
um, despite the fact that it has some brilliant football within it,
yeah.
um, and is all set around one football tournament that happened in the summer of 1971 in Mexico. Um, what attracted me was this realization that there was this sisterhood of women around the world who spoke different languages, came from very different backgrounds, but all had this really similar experience. Um, they all grew up feeling, and they all told me this, and we only need to use the line once from one woman rather than repeating it. But they all told me that they grew up believing that they were crazy because they were the only girl in the world that wanted to play football. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, it feels like, but it's not actually. When we explain how and why this happened and what it built up to. They're standing on the pitch with teams from with teams from around the world, and they're all being honoured for how they feel best in their self-expression and how they most like to express themselves, which is playing football on a pitch in front of a crowd. And suddenly it's accepted, and it's like living in this parallel universe, in a parallel universe where it wasn't weird for women to be treated with the same dignity as men.
Mm.
And I think a lot of those themes carry through to today. We touch on imbalance of power, on equal pay, on physicality, on what happens when men fear women being physically strong and using their voices. And those are all themes that frankly exist in my daily life and certainly exist in the daily life of many, many women around the world.
It's interesting. You say this about, all these women from around the world feeling like they're the only one. And I know this is 1971. Now we live in the information age. We just know, it seems like we know everybody's feelings about who they are instantly. But this is a major event. Like this is, 100,000 people in the stadium
At
over.
least, yeah.
It's insanity. How does this become a story that we're hearing about seemingly for the first time? Like even you open with the woman from I forget her name, but the one from the 1991.
Brandy.
Yes,
Yeah.
from the
Brandy.
1991 tournament, and she didn't
Yeah.
know about it.
No. Alex Morgan, who is a self-professed women's history nerd, like women's football history, didn't know about it. Do you know who also didn't know about it? Was the a real like fabulous guy called Aaron, who I've worked with a few times on different films. Who's the head of press for US women's soccer
Hmm.
and has been there for quite a while and knows everything there is to know about the history of women's soccer. And when you do the polite thing, we actually knew Brandy and Alex separately, but you do the polite thing and you put forward a formal application to do an interview. And we also wanted to involve US women's soccer in general. And we said we're going to do a thing about this tournament, and he didn't believe that it happened. We had to send proof. We had to show your workings, like because he was like, well, no, and just they're just and it's like, no, it wasn't televised. No, that because and that's not through any fault, individual fault. That's through a systematic cultural elimination of an event that meant so much to so many people at the time and could have and should have changed the course of how we see women's sport and women's activism on a more on a bigger level. So yes, it was a very emotional. It's been a very emotional journey throughout.
It's absolutely wild to me. I mean, I know we constantly learn about things in our right now, learning about things from our past that are being coming to light because of various reasons are being kept in the dark. But this is a major event, major tournament. The fact that so few people know about it is wild to me. But I also I wanted to ask you, one of the comments in this film is that they were, for these players, they talk quite openly. Our focus was being able to play. We all have the same goal, to be champions. But
Mm.
one of the players actually says, well, maybe it was a political act. And I would ask you your opinion on that. Do you think that this women's tournament was a political act.
Well, there's there's the personal political is personal quote. So
Sure.
yes, I think that um individual decisions are inherently political when they have an impact on society.
Hmm.
I think that these women were being very much themselves in what they wanted to do. And it is also a political act that that desire was taken away from them.
Right, of course.
So I think the politics is acting on them as well as them acting within it and affecting change, is that they are unfortunately an example of what happens when the system, and whatever that system is, in this case it's actually the football establishment, there's FIFA and the football associations around the world, decide that they know best. And what they thought they knew best was that women playing football would dilute the growth of the men's game. And what impact that had on individuals for decades to come is enormous. And so it's, I didn't grow up as a sport fan. I didn't grow up as a football fan, but I can see every step of the way how this story has affected how I go about the world today, over 50 years later.
It would just be nice if there was one good story that came out about FIFA. I don't want to talk, but
Well, something we can say now is that they're putting enormous resources into the women's game. So I'm not criticizing what FIFA is doing now in terms
oh,
of the women's game necessarily, and I'm keeping that as a very basic statement. Obviously, there's huge complications with everything, but one thing I think the sport does need is it needs its history back.
yeah,
It needs to be given back the stories that built it to where it is today, and the fact, the idea that women's football, and on a world level, on an international competitive level, was created in 1991 with the first FIFA World Cup, which at the time wasn't even called a World Cup. They called it the M&M's Cup because they were too scared to call it a World Cup. So they didn't want to, again, if it all went horribly wrong, they weren't going to be diluting the men's brand. So when the M&M's Cup happened in 1991, but that wasn't the beginning of this story. And I think that's very important to be reminded of. And that's what I'd like FIFA to remind people of. Again, what they're doing right now and the amount of resources being piled into the game is great. Obviously, there's all sorts of, teething issues. But yeah, the issue I have is if you take away the roots of the game, you take away that history, then you are diminishing its power and you're diminishing the right that women, and even just on an individual level, what putting this story out there gives back to the women who are involved is it can't cure 50 years of gaslighting, but it can go some way now to them being able to share that, with their families and with their friends.
absolutely. I love that idea of the restoration of history. Is that what the fear stemmed from? Because like just watching this now with 2023 eyes, 2024 eyes, um, you see FIFA reacting and all about trying to control the conversation, about trying to control the narrative. Um, but it's so like just looking at it, it's like why would there be such harm? I use the term in quotes, like in their mind of empowering the female soccer, like or
Well,
women's.
why would there be so much harm in having as many women directing films as men direct films?
A fair point. Absolutely.
It's not about football. So and yeah, you asked about society and politics. I think that's, there's you could replace the football in this with many things.
I guess that's absolutely true. Yeah, no, you're right, of course. Because it just seems so bizarre. Like you've got these women that are really excited about it, passionate, want to support their country,
I
and
know, but it's really just good old fashioned sexism, isn't it?
yeah,
It's very boring. It's a really boring answer. But I've had this asked before, and if you don't mind me saying, with all the respect and the politeness, when people say, "But why did this happen? It's so confusing. I don't believe this could have happened." It tends to be men that ask that. Women know what that feels like, and are not surprised.
yeah, no,
Shocked but not surprised is sort of the line we've come with. But I would say very few women in your life would be surprised that this was erased.
yeah, absolutely. It's a good. I'm not going to argue it because you're absolutely right. Um, it just doesn't make sense to me but it
I,
absolutely, what you're saying makes absolute sense to me as well.
mm,
You know, what do you, because we look back on this and we talk about the erasure that took place. And we know these women, you know, supported the, you know, gave everything they had, and that the whole thing about money is incredible in this particular film.
mm.
I'm wondering, in your mind, what, if anything, no, not if anything, what was achieved in your mind by this tournament to help elevate that, even at that was erased?
Well, I think unfortunately it was a victim of its own success.
Hmm.
The level of commercial value, you know, there was merchandise, there was a mascot, it was broadcast live and Technicolor. You know, like it was, maybe if it had been smaller and less successful, it might have continued.
Hmm.
It would have been seen as less of a threat. But what did happen off the back of it, very technically and directly, and this is not something we have really the space to go to in the film, is that UEFA and FIFA, but first UEFA, on seeing the success of this tournament and on the tournament that happened in 1970 as well, um, they made a decree. They had a vote amongst the members, and had a decree that that each country had to take control of the women's game, because it wasn't going anywhere. But that's what happened then directly. So all of the countries had to create a women's FA, and that was mostly done in 1971, 1972, 73. But off the back of that, they then had control of it. So each country could then stifle the grassroots and the growth, which is exactly what happened in Denmark, and that's explained in the film. It's what happened in England was a bit different. France was more progressive. So was Italy, actually. Italy had a semi-professional. You know, Elena in the film, we think she was the first woman to sign a professional soccer contract ever,
Hmm.
and that was in Italy in the '60s, late '60s. So there was movement within it, but at the same time, you know, this is very much a societal thing. But you know, who paid attention to it? It's also how long it took us to find the footage. No one had kept it. No one
Hmm.
had put it somewhere and said, "Oh, this is an important thing." Like actually digging it out of attics and vaults was part of the filmmaking process.
Hmm. Honestly, it's an incredible story. I'm so glad that you're able to bring it to us and present it to us, and
Thank you.
we can learn, um, and celebrate what was going on. Just, I know we're running out of time. What do you hope people take away from Copa 71?
Oh, that one's, I mean, other than the fact that all these women are completely badass and amazing, and that we should have more women of that age on screen, which was a really difficult thing to get through financiers, not the ones who came and supported us in the end, but there are a lot of people that said no because they said, oh, you know, they're old ladies. Um, so having women's voices on screen telling their own story, but also that, you know, everyone has a right to self-expression, whatever that is, whether that's, you know, through playing football in your local park or in an enormous stadium, whether it's making films, whatever it is, whether it's writing articles, you know, everyone has the right. No one has the right to tell anyone else which box they should be kept in.
Hmm.
um and we should all be encouraging each other for that.
I appreciate that. Honestly, Rachel, the film is wonderful. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
And
That's great. Thank you so much.
thank you. Have a great day.